You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network. Visit pencilandpaperproductions.podbean.com to find more great podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to Cinema Salsa, your tasty condiment of film talk. I may sound like Christopher Walken, but I actually am your hot and spicy co-host, Stephen White, and with me is my mild yet complex co-host, Philip Peck. Is that terrible?
I couldn't hear. I was like, he's just doing his own voice. And then, I don't know, maybe about the second sentence, I was like, oh, okay, he's doing Jersey or something. And then I was like, that actually is pretty good Christopher Walken. It just took a minute for you to get into it. And that was pretty good.
Sorry, sometimes I just got to get it back, and then there it is. So, yeah, I hope that was a fun intro for everybody. Before we get into anything big, since this happened recently, I did want to talk about this because I don't know how you feel about it, but this one kind of hurt a little bit. Richard Donner passed. And by the time anybody hears this episode, it'll kind of be a while. But for us, it's fairly fresh. And Donner was one of those directors that had films that I can always look at and be like, yes, I love that. Yes, I love that. Even if it's not great, there's still some charm to it, you know? It's just got him all over it. Superman is like one of those films that for whatever reason, it's like my appreciation for this film grew. I think as a kid, I could just appreciate it for being a Superman film or a superhero film because they were rare in our day when we were children. But over time, as I've gotten older, I saw everything he was doing, and it hurt so much to realize that such a talented director was treated so poorly on this production that they didn't have the faith in him to do what could have been a great movie, Superman is a great movie, but Superman 2 could have been equally as great, if not better. That's neither here nor there, whatever. But Goonies, Lethal Weapon, The Omen, I'm sure there's a list that can go on and on and on. And it was kind of a I don't know why I thought like the man wouldn't die, but it was just a shock. Even at 91, it was like, oh, not him, not this guy. I don't know. I just wanted to bring it up. I don't know how you feel about Donner.
Well, he's made so many really classic movies that I didn't even realize he was the one who directed them. Like The Omen, for instance. Mm-hmm. Superman, obviously. Lethal Weapon 1, 2, 3, and 4. Lethal Weapons 1 and 2 are maybe underrated, I think, critically underrated movies. They're actually pretty damn good in that 80s kind of action movie way where they kind of sneak in some more, I don't know, they're more meaningful, I think, or more interesting than a lot of stuff that's getting made now in that vein. And let's see, what else did he do? He directed TV like all the way back in, going back into the 1960s, early 60s. The man from UNCLE, is that pronounced like that, or is it Uncle?
Uncle. But
Gilligan's Island.
Wow.
Perry Mason.
See, I didn't even know that.
The Fugitive TV series. Yeah, he did a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you mentioned the Goonies, but just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, he's
Scrooged.
Mm-hmm.
Love Bill Murray, so.
He never seemed like he had a niche, like this is where he was at. Even though I guess there is kind of a familiarity to each film, like if you go from here to here to here, not to say that he's got a particular style you can find, but I guess there's a theme somewhat in each one of them, but it is. It's genre after genre after genre. It's not like he's pigeonholed into any one thing. And
just like I think it harkens back to probably that older generation of director where it's almost like instead of being like an auteur director, you're just really just a craftsperson, somebody who has a particular skill to do a job, and your job is directing. Mm-hmm. And therefore he was able to really do just about any kind of movie and do it well.
Yeah. And that's
you think about like all the complex like action and stunts and things, and something like Lethal Weapon, and then going on to something that's more like a dark comedy, like Scrooged, and could just really do anything.
sure, yeah. And he's one of those directors that I feel like always put his best foot forward. He always did the best. Again, I'm not going to say that all of his movies are flawless, but they're enjoyable. At the very least, they're enjoyable. I can't think of anything. Of course, I'm not sitting here staring at it, but there's not a movie in his filmography that stands out as like, oh, that's the bomb. That's the one that was terrible. Nothing stands out.
Yeah, and he as a producer as well, he was involved in a lot of really big movies too. He was a executive producer on The Lost Boys. And he also was involved early on in the X-Men franchise.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
He produced Free Willy, the
Wow.
series. So yeah, just all over the place and doing some stuff that, again, a lot of these movies may not be regarded as like cinematic classics, but I mean, for a certain kind of person or a certain taste, like these are really well made, if not classic movies. You know, some of these are anyway, and even the ones that aren't classics are also just really well made, good movies that a lot of people enjoy.
Yeah, it's again, I don't know if we it's a loss in the film world, but I don't really know how many more he was going to do. And I guess they can say that Goonies 2 idea is long gone now. Of course, they waited so long, and I think that was actually one of those things that I'm kind of glad didn't happen, because we hear about it time and time again. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to do a Goonies 2. It's going to be a reunion. And we've seen these reunion films where cast and crew come back after X amount of years, and it's probably been more failure than success in that regard. So with these guys, I think I'm kind of glad they never did. It was nice seeing them. Did you ever see the, I think it was the Goonies DVD or Blu-ray where they did a commentary for the movie, and they actually showed the actual cast, and they had Richard Donner there as well. It was kind of a neat thing because you could watch it, but it was separate from the movie. It wasn't just an audio track. It was like a film track where you'd watch the movie and they would show the cast and director at the bottom, like in a little bubble, and sometimes zoom in on them every now and again, depending on what was going on in the movie. But it was kind of neat to actually get to see them talk versus just hearing their voices. Getting to see them today, anyway. But anyway, we'll move on. It's sad, but what have you been watching since I've been on vacation?
Just kind of random movies. I watched The Manchurian Candidate, the remake, with Denzel Washington. I watched The Martian, Matt Damon, directed by Ridley Scott. I watched State of Play. Kind of like some of these movies don't get made anymore. Sort of these vestiges of the old Hollywood way of making a new original movie. Well, I guess The Manchurian Candidate isn't an original movie, but even that kind of movie doesn't seem to get made much anymore. We talked about this in previous podcasts, but and I watched Maria Full of Grace, and I watched the new Soderbergh movie No Sudden Move.
Yeah, I did see it. Amazon, right? Or was it Netflix?
No, that's on HBO.
HBO. I knew it was one of those. I've been bouncing around on all of them. There's too many of them, but yeah.
And it's released in theaters too. I'm sure it's not making any money in theaters, but it's kind of a minor. It's okay. I mean, it's well made. Doesn't really break any new ground, and I think it kind of tries to shoehorn in kind of a message or a point of view, like right at the end. But I don't know. It doesn't really do anything with it.
Gotcha.
And it's not really woven into the broader story or the narrative or the action of the movie very well. So, I mean, it's nice. It was fun to watch. I like most of his movies are pretty fun to watch, even if they're not super great. But good actors as always. It's a huge cast of enjoyable actors and doing interesting things. So,
I might give it a go. I mean, the cast from what I saw looked pretty good, so I was hesitant, but it was Soderbergh too, so I thought I might give it a watch at some point. I'll get around to it.
I just like, he just does. he does whatever he wants. You know, he's gone all over the map, kind of like Donner, but in his own, not in that kind of Hollywood jack of all. What am I trying to say? He's hired gun kind of way.
Yeah.
Soderbergh just is able to do what he wants to do, and he's like has enough clout, or just to. He works. I guess he does his own. He shoots his own movies. He edits his own movies. He directs his own movies, and I think has enough relationships with those actors that they're willing to. I don't know. I'm sure they don't get paid their full rates just to work on his movies. So I don't know. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's good to
They
have.
might not all turn out to be masterpieces, but
Name me one director that's directed all masterpieces. I got none.
Misawa. I don't know. Nobody probably.
Yeah, so I mean, it's good that he kind of has this Hollywood aesthetic to him, but yet he can still kind of seemingly work outside the system in a way. So it's kind of a nice dichotomy because he's like right there on the edge of indie, but yet still Hollywood.
I mean, he's shot 2 movies on iPhones.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
Is that all you watched?
I'd never seen The Martian. Mm-hmm. I've had it on Blu-ray. I think I bought it used from local store. Sometimes I just drop in and pick up some random Blu-rays, but I end up almost never watching them. But I was like, I need to watch this. I've never seen it.
I haven't either. So
you never seen The Martian?
I have not.
Okay.
It was one of those that I guess I'd heard so much about, and you hear tidbits and memes and whatnot, and I'm just like, not sure. I don't know if I want to. Should I devote my time to it?
Well, I think it's worth watching. I mean, I'm kind of a Ridley Scott fan, although he's made a lot of bad, not so great movies. Also, these are very much Hollywood movies, and this one has just like, I enjoyed it, but I was also annoyed by it because Matt Damon's character is so smart. It's almost like, you can't relate to him because he's just a freaking genius.
Yeah.
And everything just, even when he messes up, he's able to, everything is so contrived, but he's just so smart and funny, but like in an irritating way. Like he's just too good. Like it's like, you just, I don't know. He's kind of annoying.
It's like, you son of a bitch, you're being too smart.
That's kind of the way it struck me. Yeah, it's like, I don't like this guy just because he's too good.
Okay.
Not like good as in like he does good for humanity, but he's just good at everything.
Yeah.
He's got no flaws. That's why. Yeah, I think that's what is missing from the movie. Usually a character has some flaw that they have to overcome.
Yeah, that's
in a way, but he has no flaws. So that's kind of a weird oversight, I think, in the script. But it's a really interesting looking movie. It was shot for 3D, but it looks amazing. The cinematography, it just, even if not watching it in 3D, it just pops off the screen.
Okay.
It's a really interesting movie to watch. What about you? What have you been watching on your long vacation?
Well, I feel like I've watched a lot, but vacation and all that. So I'm just going to kind of focus in on what I can remember. I got excited. HBO Max put on all the Planet of the Apes films, the original Planet of the Apes. And I got excited about that because I haven't seen them in quite a while. So I binged those.
I really like a couple of those new ones. The first one.
Oh, yeah. The new ones?
Yeah, those are good.
Yeah. Yeah, they're solid. In fact, Matt Reeves directed, I think it was the last 2, War and Rise? No, Rise is the first one. Dawn. He directed the last 2. So when I heard that he was directing the new Batman film, I was like, okay, it's in good hands. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
But the old ones, I know it would probably be a hard sell to get anyone today, like the youth of today, to watch these films. But I still feel like the first one is still so relevant because it is such a smart, great movie. And even the effects, I know they're cheap by comparison since we can actually create apes that can talk today, but it's still so effective. It's weird, at least in the first movie. I know in the subsequent sequels, they lost their budget and went to masks for some of the wider, big scenes and whatnot. But the first one is such a great film when it comes to...
How did they do the first one?
I mean, they still did like makeup prosthetics and everything like that. But I think each character, like if they were going to use a mask, they would be relegated to the far, far back. Like you would never tell that that person was wearing a mask. Okay. If you're going to be up front in the camera, you have to have prosthetics. I mean, I still feel like the effects still hold up. I mean, I would sit there. They earned their Academy Award they got. And in fact, I think they actually created the Academy Award for special effects because of this movie. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember my history correctly, that's right. And it might have been an honorary award, and then from there forward. But it holds up in my book. The films, as they do kind of go down the line, they lack in quality. I will say that if you've never seen it, go check this out. They have on there the extended version of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which is one of my favorites out of the original series. And this, if you've seen one of the newer ones, it would essentially be like Rise of the Planet of the Apes would have been a remake of Conquest in a manner of speaking. You know, Still a lot of the same plot points happen, but it's different time, different way of approaching them. Still the same concept. Anyway, if you don't know the history of why there's an extended version of this, they hired director J. Lee Thompson, and he directed, I think it was The Guns of Navarone. It was a bloody, R-rated cowboy flick, if that's the one I'm trying to remember. And they hired him to do this film, and he went in with that same aesthetic. You know, going to be violent, because I mean, we're talking about a movie that's essentially looking at a very dark version, or I guess it's equally as dark, depending on how you look at it, an alternate version of civil rights and slavery, because that's kind of what's going on in Conquest. Is all the apes are enslaved, being treated like slaves by the humans. And then they revolt. And the revolt itself was bloody. It was violent. It was vicious. And when the studio saw that, they were like, no. We gotta rein this back in, because there's families out there watching these movies. We can't do this. These are G-rated films. He's like, all right. So they cut them down and kind of got a PG rating, which I think this is the first movie out of the series that got a PG, which is really messed up if you think about it, because someone got shot in the head in the second movie, and they showed it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't understand the rating systems back in the 60s and 70s, but anyway, they made the cuts and they moved it along. But this restored a lot of that violence, plus it restored the original ending. And I'm so glad that I watched it with my wife, because we had differing opinions on how the ending went. She remembered Caesar being compassionate at the end, like when the apes were ready to just go on their killing spree. They re-edited the ending to where he was compassionate. He was like, "No, lay down your weapons. We're gonna start clean with the humans, or try to figure out a different way to go about this. So end the violence. We'll start fresh." And that was kind of in response to the R rating and all that they got. A real dark ending. But for me, the original ending stayed in line with everything you were seeing, because it was utter chaos. You know, people are dying. They're loading up bodies and everything, and just seeing all this chaos. And then for him to just turn on a dime and be like, you know what? It's fine. We're gonna change things. I know we did all this, but we're gonna calm down, and we're gonna fix things, and then we're gonna have a great time. This was a scene in the moment when he was just like on his rallying cry, just like, we are breaking free, and that's pretty much where it ended, with that rallying cry. I'm in charge. We are free. Boom. And I felt like it honored what had come before it. Like that was the ending that should have been there, despite how Caesar kind of comes off looking. He kind of comes off like a fanatic, and you kind of have less sympathy for him. But tonally, it works. Mm-hmm. So I was conflicted by it. My wife didn't like it. She was like, I don't like him. I don't like how he is right now. And I was like, but tonally, it works. You know, and it was really interesting, because I didn't know what kind of stuff they were going to add in, and I was really surprised by some of the stuff, because if you thought seeing apes hunting humans, and the first one was bad. This was equally as bad because there were shots that they cut out where they're just loading them up into piles and just,
Oh, wow.
and even at the end, there was a shot where you see them kind of raise their guns, and the scene was they pretty much started pounding on every living human right there in front of them, just going to town. It was like, holy shit. So if you want to see an alternate version of that, if you've seen the original version or you just want to see the more violent R-rated take on it, check out the extended version of Conquest. It's listed under the extras on HBO Max because I'd heard that it was on there and I didn't see it initially. So extras.
I'll check that out. I mean, I've seen the original, but I've not gone and watched any of the others. So that sounds like something worth checking out.
If I was to rate them, I would definitely say 1, 3, 4, 2, and 5.
Well, there's that many.
Yeah, I mean, there's 5 at least in the original trilogy. You can skip Tim Burton's. We'll forgive you for that because that's just.
What is it? So it's a trilogy if it's 3 movies. What is it if it's 5 movies?
They called it the Saga.
What is 5?
Legacy. I don't know.
I can't think of the name.
Quintilogy. So yeah, I watched Planet of the Apes. Definitely check those out if you haven't. HBO Max. I did also check out, just out of curiosity, I was never a fan of the books, but Netflix did a Fear Street movie.
Yeah, I've been hearing about that.
And I thought...
It's been all over Twitter.
Yeah. So I thought I'd check this out, see what all the fuss was about, because I didn't hear anything bad about it. I didn't hear it was like, oh my God, this will blow your mind. It harkened back to, like, if you're familiar with the Scream franchise, that's what I got, like the vibes, like how they were approaching it. And then, of course, the story doesn't really stay on that path. It was just more like, how did the killer stalking the kids, how does that feel? Feels very Scream-esque. And then you get into your twists and turns about whatever goes on Fear Street. Again, I know of the books. Like, my ex-wife used to read the books, so I was aware of them. Beyond that, I don't know anything about them. So
yeah, I've been hearing some decent buzz about that. It kind of fills that need or that little bit of sort of that 90s.
Yeah.
Not like shockingly scary, not like over the top horror, but just a fun kind of throwback horror movie.
Yeah. And I think today, when we're recording, the next chapter of that should be out, which is like in 1978, and I think it's a throwback to the 80s films. So I'm kind of interested, I think, a little bit more in that than I was the 90s one. But still, it was just, I wanted to see what it was about, see if it would be any good. And I was pleasantly surprised. I won't say it kept my attention the entire time, but for the most part, I was like, all right, I'm kind of into this.
I'm kind of curious to see it now. Maybe I wonder if my wife would be, She says she doesn't like horror movies, but then I'll find her watching some shit. And I'm like, how are you watching
what
this?
What are you doing? What are you watching?
I don't like horror movies, but you've watched some fucked up shit. Oh, sorry, I don't know if we can say all that.
Yeah, we can. I put us on the explicit list.
Oh, good.
So what is her usual gripe about horror films? Is it the gore? Is it just something?
They just give her nightmares. She just... I mean, they just stick with her, and
that's my wife.
Yeah, but I think she likes them. We were talking about Saint Maud earlier in the podcast, and I was going to tell my wife about it, but then she had already watched it, and I was like, "You watched that?" And she was like, "I wish I hadn't, but I did." And she was watching this like zombie apocalypse show on Netflix. I don't remember what it's called, but it was like really intense, and she was having nightmares about that. I should look up what that show is called. I don't know if you've seen it.
I feel like I've heard of it, but I don't know the name.
I'm pretty sure it's not an American production, but I could be wrong about that. But it's very visceral. It's shot in like a very documentary style way, and it's just people running around with guns and shooting everything and everyone that moves. It's very like military.
Wow.
Wannabe. Like, it's very much like if the doomsday preppers actually got their wish, this is what would happen.
Okay.
I just sat and watched it with her for a bit one night because I didn't know what she was doing, and she was telling me about it, and it was pretty intense. Anyway, so her beef is nothing really other than the fact that she just can't handle him. But she was watching It Follows one. Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
Oh my God. That's my all-time recommendation for people who want to be scared shitless.
Yeah.
That movie scared the shit out of me. I wasn't watching it. When we lived in an apartment several years ago, I was on my computer and, it was in the living room, the bigger kitchen living room, dining area, whatever, one big room. And she was watching that movie. And I was like, what in the hell are you watching? And then I started watching it. So I've seen pretty much the whole thing. I haven't seen the very beginning, but I was in the room when it was happening. That movie is freaking terrifying.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I'm sure a lot of people are like, whatever, you're a wuss. That's not a scary movie. But I think it's terrifying. And she watched that. I don't know. So I think she does like horror movies. She just likes to say that she doesn't.
It's like,
but she secretly does.
Somebody who punishes himself by eating jalapenos and really hot stuff, and even though you're gonna suffer, you're just like,
my thing is that's exactly. That's a good comparison analogy.
Okay, well, fair enough. I mean, if she wants to suffer, that's fine. You can't always be there to pick up the pieces.
No, I'm the one who's traumatized.
Exactly.
I feel like she just rolls with it.
It's like, I can't help you when I'm terrified. This doesn't work.
Yeah.
We just hold each other and that's it.
Not to go off on too much of a tangent, and you can cut me off if you think this is too much of a tangent, but I know you're a gamer. Mm-hmm. Did you ever get to play PT on PS4?
I did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That fucking scared the shit out of me. I couldn't play it by myself. I had to have a friend over, and we had to play it together. But even so, we were freaking terrified.
Yeah, it was.
It's too bad that you can't.
If you still had it, I've still got it on a PlayStation in here, and as long as I don't delete it, as far as I know, I'm good. So my intention is to hang on to it.
I sold my PS4, and then my wife bought me another PS4 many years later. But yeah, even though I have the same account and everything, I can't get it anymore.
It's terrible.
Very disappointing.
Yeah. Well, the rumor has it, I know this is not a video game podcast, but I'm just going to say, rumor has it that there's something that could be coming out, maybe, possibly, that goes back to that, but I don't know.
By Kojima and...
That something could be actually happening, but I don't know how true that is, because people like to spread rumors. So you want to get on topic? Because
I mean, sure. I guess
we can talk about that real quick. This week we want to kind of talk about the grit versus fantasy, and that might not be the best way to put it. I guess in a manner of speaking, the gritty remakes or reboots or gritty versions of things that are typically fantasy or maybe lighthearted. And we want to kind of dissect this and discuss it because it's a trend that hasn't quite slowed down. It's slowed down a little bit because Hollywood now has a new thing that they can look at and be like, oh, we got to chase that. A new car like a dog. But they chased this for a while, and I still feel like they still are chasing it. If we want to kind of look back on when this really began, I would actually say that from what I could look at, because I was trying to do some digging, like when did this really take hold? And I would really have to say that Hollywood's obsession with the gritty take on classic characters took off with Batman Begins, because we're taking a character that might not necessarily come off as fantastic, but there have been fantastic versions of this character. If you go back to Adam West, that's kind of comical and comic booky. And then you look at something like Justice League cartoons where Batman's in space and he's fighting Superman or whatever it may be. It doesn't seem realistic because Batman is in a superhero-esque element. But here they take a fantastic character, ground it in the most realistic way they can, and what I feel we got was an impressive take on Batman because the character itself works in a very believable way because every aspect of his origin, from the death of his parents, desire for revenge, and ultimately being consumed by the persona he's created, it's not that fantastic. It's something that could happen, albeit with a couple $1 million laying around, which, I could be Batman. I just don't have that aspect of it. Maybe I could. I don't know. My parents aren't dead. Superman, on the other hand, is a fantastic character, a being from another planet. doesn't really lend itself to grounding, you know. So a dark, gritty reboot doesn't really work, especially with a character like that who's always kind of been that beacon of hope for a city. And then you strip that away and he's not Superman. In fact, I would even say that the film Brightburn, have you ever seen Brightburn?
No, I have not.
That is a dark, gritty take on Superman. That is what would happen. Okay, what would happen if he didn't have the good parents? What would happen if he didn't have a great upbringing? You get that. That's the gritty take on Superman that needed to happen, not Man of Steel. Because all he does in that movie is mope. And he's just like, oh, nobody likes me. Oh, I don't know what to do. It's like, dude, you're Superman. Why are you moping? It's just, and I'm not going to say that there's not room to explore a Superman that doubts himself. But in those movies, to what end is he moping? I mean, he's not positive at all. He's a Christ symbol, if anything. That's what Zack Snyder turned him into. He's like, I'm Jesus. It's like, all right, dude, sure, whatever. I don't understand the parallels. You can throw him out there, sure, where he died and came back in Justice League. But hey, you know what? That wasn't divine intervention. That was the Justice League messing with a cosmic box or whatever. I don't even want to get into that. Do you have anything bad to say about Zack Snyder?
Of course I do. Where do I begin? I'm going to lay off Zack Snyder for today.
Okay.
I don't know. So I don't have. There's been so many iterations of the Superman movie, going back to Richard Donner, who we spoke of earlier, and then it was Bryan Singer who did the first reboot, right?
Yes. Kind of a pseudo sequel to Donner's Vision.
Okay.
Which didn't quite pan out like he hoped.
Didn't land
Yeah.
very well. I've seen parts of that movie. I've never seen the whole thing.
If he'd have made it more fantastic, it may have been something fun. But his Superman's always like, Lois doesn't love me. It's like, oh, Jesus. This mopey Superman.
To kind of take it maybe the opposite perspective a little bit, in defense of Hollywood, for Batman, for instance, there were dark comics that they were kind of drawing from, going back to The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, and then there was Batman Year One in the 80s that really, and then obviously The Watchmen, which was really, I mean, it was all new superheroes, but really took the comics into a more contemplative or grown up, quote unquote, grown up space.
Yeah.
So there was material there that Hollywood was drawing from when they were doing these dark. Even I would even argue that Tim Burton's Batman, even though it was very comic booky, but it was pretty graphic.
Yeah.
Especially for a movie in 1989, a PG-13 movie that, I mean, didn't shy away from violence in any way. And then, well, those movies they went super campy afterward, especially after what's his name took over. Schumacher, thank you. But yeah, the first two that Burton did were pretty dark. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, with Batman Begins, they're very much drawing from those Frank Miller stories from the 80s, Batman Year One especially. I don't know. So I was never a big Superman comic book fan growing up, so I don't have a lot to reference. So I don't know if they were pulling from any specific comics or if they were just taking the fact that going dark with Batman worked and they were like, oh, let's do it with Superman. So I don't really know there, but I do know that, I do think that at least for Batman anyway, that there was groundwork laid with the comic books that they were drawing from.
And solid groundwork at that. I don't feel like that there's anything in the Superman library that goes, even if it's dark, there's some way that he doesn't lose who he is. And I feel like they didn't understand the character they were making in Man of Steel. They didn't understand Superman. It's like, to your point, you have a character that's rooted in dark, and then you're like, well, what do we do if we take this light character and put it into dark? That's the beautiful dichotomy of the two characters, is they are yin and yang. And that's why Batman versus Superman didn't work in the way that I feel like it should have, because you didn't have these two parallels going at one another. You had two characters that were essentially on the same spectrum of dark, and it just didn't work.
It's there. It seems like they're very much chasing a style, or it's style over substance, and not really, like you say, understanding the character. That contrast is more interesting than having two characters wallowing in misery for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, too, because you could have that same argument about the two Justice League movies, Zack Snyder versus Joss Whedon. Joss tried to comic book it up, where Zack kind of went back to his roots of, we got to do it this way, got to do it stylized, got to do it, and turned it into a 4-hour piece of work, which I did enjoy, I'll say, because by comparison, it was just, which is better, the one that makes more sense or the one that's just saying like, who cares, just fucking let them do whatever for 2 hours. All right. So,
well, I think it's like so let me just shit on Zack Snyder. It's giving a not very talented filmmaker the reins to do something that he is basically, if the Batman Begins and the Dark Knight weren't such huge successes, both critically and financially, then, he's taking like the wrong lesson, or basically just taking like, oh, these are dark movies. This is very much this is exploring the origins of Batman and his sort of twisted persona. Let's do the same with Superman. But like, no, you don't need to do the same with Superman. Like, look at Marvel. They never went dark and twisted with any of their IPs, right? For the most part.
I mean, not really. I mean,
they've very much been comic books, comic book movies, and they don't go into. Of course, they explore the personalities and the psyches of their characters, because comic books do that as well. But it's, it doesn't have to drill down into the depths of their souls so much like he's trying to do in a way that's just so contrived and not interesting. It's not interesting. That's not, like you said, that's not what Superman is, and that's not what people want from a Superman story.
I mean, I'll even double down on Zack Snyder doing something completely and utterly stupid, is when he made Watchmen, which is one of the greatest literary pieces that I've ever read, and I challenge anyone to tell me something better, especially in a graphic novel form. Anyway, copying that and pasting it essentially is what he did. The visionary the man is took a comic book and said, I'm going to shoot that. So you had your storyboard right there in a book. Bravo, asshole, for coming up with all this stuff. Furthermore, and this is where that gritty thing gets on my nerves, we changed the ending because it's not believable. God damn it, you have a movie with a man who can turn large, who can teleport, who can do everything beyond Superman, and you're going to say, well, the ending of the real book is not believable. What? That makes no sense. The blue guy, Dr. Manhattan, look at him. That's not believable. An alien invasion kind of happening fictionally, that's not believable. No one can fake that. But this guy, okay, fine, whatever. That's that whole, the mindset of that just doesn't work for me. I do not understand that. How do they not equate to one another? Alien invasion, big blue guy. Just, I don't know. One of the many reasons I don't like the man and the decisions he's made, because the ending made sense. And then now you're villainizing one of your heroes for the sake of a better end, or a better ending in your case, or a more believable one, for whatever it may be. I don't know. I'm going to go on about Zack Snyder for a while. What other movies are not Zack Snyder films?
I mean, Zack Snyder can tell the story that he wants to tell. He can change Superman if he wants to change Superman, but he's not doing anything. I mean, I don't give a shit about Superman. If you want to tell a dark Superman story, then tell a dark Superman story. That's fine. But tell a good story, and that's another. I will always go back to Zack Snyder just not being a good storyteller. I mean, it doesn't matter what story he's trying to tell. It's just all generic. It's all, borrowed from someone else. Fine, but he's not putting anything. He's not putting a spin on it that's doing anything interesting or unique. It's just doing the Zack Snyder thing, which is basically overdoing everything, beating everything to death. It's just, how can you, I don't know, 4 hours of Justice League? Hell no, I'm not watching that shit. I'm not going to watch 2.5 hours of Zombie Army of the Dead. Like, no, man. Like,
I know it was. I don't know why I did it. I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess. I mean, and this is funny too, considering I gave the 4-hour Justice League thing a shot, even though I'm not a fan of the man, but yet I never once. And this is
well, you're a fan of the comics,
yes,
and stuff,
and
so
that's,
you want to have a good.
But on the same token, I'm a fan of the Fantastic Four in a way, but I did not watch the newest iteration of that they did before Fox sold off to Disney, which is their gritty reboot. I outright refused to watch that movie because I heard nothing but it's a mess. It makes no sense. And I'm like, so if this movie is garbage and you're telling me as such, why am I going to waste my time trying to find anything in a movie that does not matter? Like, none of these characters are going to continue on anywhere. They do not exist anymore in the realm of film. If there's nothing redeemable about it, I'm not going to subject myself to this film. Period. You know, I'm not going to sit there and say that the first two that they did were the greatest superhero films ever. But you know what? At least they were in line with the characters. It was a fun, silly movie in the sense that, you know, the Fantastic Four are kind of a crazy family in a sense. You know, they're not serious. It's kind of comedic. So that's what they went for. They tipped and towed the line a little bit to where it was like dark with Doctor Doom, and then we're back with the guys at the tower. Oh, that's fun and hijinks and whatnot. It works because it is what it is. And I can't wait to see what Marvel does with it. But I couldn't do it. And I feel like that's what turns me off about a lot of films like that, because it's hit or miss. Some movies can really embrace like a dark, gritty remake, but it's few and far between. I'm trying to think. I made a list of a few to kind of pull from, and maybe this will kind of get you going. Did you, when I wrote this down, I was trying to remember if you told me you'd watch this or if like you were a fan of this show. Did you tell me before on a previous episode that you watched Riverdale?
I did watch way too much Riverdale.
Okay. So give me your take on that, because that is kind of a gritty remake on Archie. So well,
it's so campy that it's not so much a gritty. I mean, it is gritty because it goes places that the Archie comics would never go. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no. I mean, I don't know. I didn't read a whole lot of Archie comics, but I liked the art style, and they were always at the grocery store checkout, and I bought them. But I don't ever remember anything happening. Like, nobody ever did anything. They just went to school, and they talked to each other, and Archie tried to go out with Betty and Veronica, and Jughead, I don't know, like, they just didn't do anything. So this show is still all of those things, but things happen. So you have a gang, you've got a twisted father who's like the Machiavelli of the whole town, whatever. So fine, you have like it's a blank slate because those comics were so empty, at least in my remembrance of what I read. It went on for years and decades, so who knows, I might have missed out, but it's still very much a goofy, campy WB or whatever channel that airs on show, and it works because, again, it's a blank slate. Like, nobody had, I don't know, I can't imagine anybody has a great attachment to those Archie comics. They're just they're like soap operas. Yeah. They don't have much heft to them. People like them, I think, but I can't imagine anybody being so drawn into the mythos of Archie. I mean, who cares? You can do whatever you want to it. So that's fine. You reboot that because people know Archie vaguely, and that's the other thing too. Like, at this point, who the hell even cares? The people that are watching that show on the WB don't have any idea about those comic books. They don't know anything about them. That would be my guess.
You're probably right.
So it's just a name that has some value somewhere, but very little anyway to the people that are actually watching the show. So do whatever you want to. And that's the thing too. again, with Superman, if you want to tell a dark Superman story, by all means do it, but just tell a good story. And I think that's where we're, with Zack Snyder especially, or with the Fantastic Four, those movies, even the goofy ones have been terrible. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. If you want to reimagine it, then reimagine it. Just do a good job of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's the bottom line.
I think you're probably right, because through a lot of these, I'm trying to really see where a dark, gritty version works. For example, I guess to use another example, and I hate to keep reaching into this bag, but they always seem to be the ones that seem to get these gritty reboots. When they did the Ninja Turtles in gritty reboot. Now, if anybody can go back, if you're a comic aficionado, you'll know that they had very dark roots when they started.
Those comics were, same time frame as the Frank Miller stuff coming. Like Frank Miller going back to the Daredevil era in the late 70s, which were, comic code comics, so they couldn't be that dark. But they were definitely pushing the bounds. And then when he was able to get away from that and able to do basically whatever he wanted, those Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were not subject to the comics code. Yeah, they were independent comic books, and they were bloody. I don't know. They probably weren't very sexual, I guess, with the turtles and whatnot. But maybe they were. But they were pushing the bounds. Yeah. Again, you have a baseline. You're not changing anything. But I think what people remember, because those comics, like I said, were underground, independent comics. So the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles didn't really take off until they became a cartoon. Yeah. That was aired on whatever it was back then. And that was not the same as the comics. Mm-hmm. That was somebody was like, oh, here's a cute idea for a TV show based on this kind of dark comic, but let's toss all that because we can't do that. Yeah. And it's not going to be successful. We won't sell a lot of toys. We're going to basically neuter it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what everybody probably thinks about when they think of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But the actual original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a dark, violent comic book. Yeah. So you have that to go back to in a movie if you want.
And what was funny about it is if you go back to the original movie, which I still say holds up and is classic in my view, it's a good movie. They had this nice blend of both. Like it had this very dark aesthetic, like they were adhering to the comics and its origins and even the story itself. But then they gave a little bit and they were just like, all right, well, each one will have their different.
Yeah, it was a PG movie, right?
PG-13.
It was a PG-13 movie?
So
I haven't seen it since I was a kid, probably. Dude. But yeah, it was dark. It was, like you said, it towed that line between. Yeah.
And it wasn't until parents groups saw it and they were just like, oh, the violence. You go and watch part 2, you can definitely see a difference. It's like, whoa, we gotta camp this up. We gotta cartoon it. They can't be using their weapons. It's like, but why? That's what they use.
They're ninjas.
Yeah, it's like, no, you can't use your weapon. Can't use it. Okay. So they would come up with creative ways to use their weapons or use something else instead of their weapons. It's frustrating when you watch it and you have that knowledge. You're like, God, that's so stupid. But the first one does a great job finding a way to honor both and still be that. When you go to the remakes, I feel like they could have bumped it up. They could have tried to be a little bit darker and go back to the roots, but Michael Bay and his bayness put his stank all over it and turned it into a meandering mess of a movie, which I do not go back to. I will go back to the 90s one anytime, but that one,
haven't seen them.
I don't care. And what was the worst part about it is you go to the sequel and then they threw in other classic characters from the cartoon and like, hey, look, we got these guys. You remember them from the cartoons? It's like, yeah, but I don't want to watch your movie. I really don't. I mean, you're not going to suck me in like that. It was cool and all. You did it, but nah. One other one I do want to mention as far as finding a way to improve upon, and for me, this is a great example, and I probably mentioned this before, but I feel like this is a great example of doing something darker but better, and it would be The Fly. And this is not to say that every remake of an old horror film has ever worked. The Fly was, and back in the 50s, it was silly, kind of head swapping pretty much between the scientist and the fly. So that's all they really did. It was supposed to be some teleportation they did, but then they swapped heads, and he was on a spider web going, "Help me!" And then the other guy was just a doctor with a fly head. It was, for what it was in the time, it worked for those horror elements back in the 50s. And obviously, The Fly is not the only horror film that's been remade. You got Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, all solid efforts. But for me, The Fly just works on so many levels. It's a better movie narratively, because we're not trying to dig into these old ways of characters, or I don't know. It's just not trying to overdo anything. It really takes the concept and says, all right, but what if we do it like this? And really goes in deep, turning Jeff Goldblum not into a guy who just swaps his head with a fly, but a guy who becomes a fly. And it's just the most grotesque thing you'll ever see, but it works. It's one of those things you don't want to watch it, but you can't help but stare at it as it's happening. That kind of weird fascination. And I never got that same thrill out of Dracula or the Wolfman or Frankenstein, the newer iterations of it. And there've been too many, if you ask me.
I think it has to do with who is involved with the remake.
Yeah.
Having people involved who have a vision, who have something unique that they want to do and say with this remake, it makes all the difference. Michael Bay or whoever with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles isn't really concerned about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or they're just concerned about making a dumbass movie that makes a lot of money, I guess. David Cronenberg is a director who makes crazy, weird, disgusting movies. That's kind of his thing. So it's no surprise that if he's going to make The Fly, it's going to be a freaking weird-ass, gross movie. That's just what he does. And that makes for an interesting remake. And another one that comes to mind for me is The Thing.
Yes.
John Carpenter took Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World and had license to make the goriest freaking body horror movie that he could come up with. Mm-hmm. And it was a disaster financially, I suppose, but time has stood the test of time and really been regarded as probably one of his best movies.
Yeah.
And kind of a classic. But yeah, these are people who have a point of view, who have a thing that they want to do that's beyond just, as much Zack Snyder has a thing that he wants to do, he's not good at it.
He needs oversight.
Sorry, Zach.
He needs oversight because, in my opinion,
he does.
George Lucas is a great example of that. The man, I give him all the credit in the world for creating Star Wars. But if you take a look, the reason I give him all the credit in the world for the first Star Wars is that was a passion project. He was in love with this idea. He wanted to make this great movie about Star Wars, and he did it. When he had the money to do whatever the fuck he wanted and did the prequels, it was just like, I can do whatever I want. The passion is gone. He's just like, I got the money. I can throw it at here, throw it there. The passion wasn't there, therefore the passion didn't show in the projects. In the other movies, Empire and Return, he had people oversight, and he still had that passion, but he had to step away. But other people were like, hey, we're going to take care of this for you. It's fine. It'll be fine. We got it. And they did.
I think all art, and we've talked about this too, I don't necessarily regard movies as art. I think they're artistic, but they're also equally commercial projects. But anyway, all art has to have limitations. If you have no limitations, you end up making everything has to have boundaries. Everything has to have limits. And even if you like with Star Wars, how much money did he have to make that movie? How many people probably thought it was going to be shit? How many people were telling him, "No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that." And even though he was probably pushing back to as hard as he could in order to make his vision a reality, still had limitations, and that makes for a stronger piece. when he didn't have any limitations, when nobody was pushing back and saying, no, this is, you can't do this, you can't do that, or maybe don't do that because it's not, it doesn't work. He was able to make the movies that he wanted to make, and they sucked. And you hear about, I don't follow these things that closely, but when you hear about, Joss Whedon taking over for Zack Snyder, or different difficulties that he's had making the movies that he wants to make for DC for their cinematic universe at Warner Brothers, is Joss Whedon's version worse than the 4-hour version that he was eventually able to cobble together? Is it worse?
Technically, yeah, because it's incoherent and sexualized in certain ways that they shouldn't be. It's just, it was boring. It was meandering. And you could say...
Joss Whedon's was?
Yeah, and you could say the same. And it's amazing. You'd say, well, how the fuck is a 4-hour version not the same thing? At least it was coherent to a point. I'll give it that.
Well, again, there's a lot, too, that goes into these movies where things are cut out, things are edited down, and that it's not necessarily the fault of the director, because they don't often, not many directors get final cut of a movie. It's, they shoot the movie and then it's given to the studio to finish it.
Furthermore,
and
he's had how many years to finish this proper? So his vision, he's had 4 fucking years to, come on now. At least I'll give him that. He's had 4 years. He wasn't under the gun. So he could have perfected the garbage in that time. But again, I'm not giving him that much credit. I'm just saying that I watched it and I was like, well, this was better, sort of.
Talking about remakes, gritty remakes, I wouldn't necessarily put in movies like The Fly as necessarily the same thing as, the Superman, the Zack Snyder Supermans or something like that. I think they're very different because there's a lot of distance. I guess, too, Superman, the movies came out in the late 70s, right? In the early 80s. So that's a pretty significant amount of time.
Yeah. We're
pretty much the same as like the original Fly to the remake.
It's taken a concept like Star Trek and trying to make it gritty. When they did those new, now I understand they were trying to adhere to whatever original.
I wouldn't say those are that gritty though. Those are pretty.
Not necessarily.
I think those are pretty faithful to the spirit of Star Trek.
But they tried to action them up a little bit. It was like, all right, but Star Trek, but action. We got to have action.
That's true.
And
that's true.
For purists, I'm not one of them, just saying. But I could see where they would be a little bit like, well, shit, this isn't my Star Trek. This isn't the Star Trek I remember. This is more like
that's
bang,
true.
bang, bang.
These are very much, I get your point there. But it's not necessarily going in a gritty direction. It's going in an action direction.
Yeah, fair enough. So maybe that's a bad example.
Well, the other thing too about something like The Fly or The Thing, there's not a really strong connection to those. I'm sure those films have their fans, but it's not like Superman, which is an ongoing. Since the 1930s, there's been Superman stories told every month.
Yeah.
For how long is that? Not 80.
He's almost. He's reaching his 100 in another decade or two
now. Right? So there's a lot of history of Superman as the character. And of course it's changed. Changes are a result of cultural changes and generational changes, but the spirit of it or the core of the character kind of remains, I guess. Like you were saying, like Superman is not, there's not a lot of room to go into the psyche of Superman. Like, you don't care. That's not really what Superman's about. And for Zack Snyder, maybe that's what makes Superman not an interesting character, and which is why he's like, well, let me do something with this character in order to make him interesting to me. Let me plumb the depths of Superman's soul. Let me turn him into a Christ figure. Whatever. All that's fine. But is your movie any good? That's the important thing.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
No, that's fair. As long as you're being faithful to the characters, I feel like grit can work, but overall, I feel trying to take rather lighthearted characters in gritty directions doesn't necessarily work. I'm sure I could list off a couple of other examples, but I won't. Alice in Wonderland, I won't. That just didn't make any sense. Hansel and Gretel, I won't bring up anymore Red Riding Hood. Why am I doing this? These are movies that shouldn't have dark, gritty. Fantasy Island. Why is that a horror movie? I don't know. It sounded like a good idea, and it didn't turn out to be. So, do you got anything else to say about reboot? Or we're not talking about reboot. We're talking about gritty versus fantasy. Reboots got mixed in there.
I'm just trying to think of other examples. I feel like DC has been the primary culprit here, right?
Because they wanted to be different. Because Marvel's doing this thing, and we're like, well, we can't do that. We got to do this. They got to be different.
I also think it's because their movies weren't working, or they weren't as successful. Because they did a lot of the Green Lantern.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a dark and gritty movie, but it wasn't. No one really liked it.
Nah.
And aside, they had huge success with Batman, so I think that's probably where they were thinking, well, this worked, whereas our other attempts to build out our universe haven't worked. So let's kind of copy what we think worked with Batman and just paste it over onto Superman and the Justice League.
Yeah, but also notice the heel turn they made with Suicide Squad, because that was supposed to be a dark movie, and then when Batman vs. Superman bombed, they re-edited the trailer and made it look like, oh, look, it's like Guardians of the Galaxy. We're funny too. It's like, dude,
Yeah, and that all probably just speaks to the studio, the people in the just not being as good as the ones over at Marvel. They're just not as good.
Yeah.
They're not as talented. They don't have strategy. They don't have a vision. They're really just kind of like reading the tea leaves. Changing on a dime,
mm-hmm.
or turning on a dime, in order to chase what they think is going to work without really having a vision of what they want to accomplish.
Yeah.
I think that's the big difference between what DC and Marvel have, or the studios, that have been producing these movies.
Mm-hmm.
Warner Brothers has had some successes, but it's like when you have a director who you can't fuck with, like Nolan.
Yeah.
He's gonna make his movie. He's gonna make a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that Nolan's best movies are the ones where he, kind of has those restrictions,
mm-hmm.
like Batman, as opposed to doing whatever he wants to do. His movies are a little bit baffling, but for me, it comes down to a studio trying to chase trends and trying to turn shit into gold, I guess, or polishing a turd. They know they have a shitty movie, and then they're going to try to, I don't know, do whatever the hell they can in order to make it work somehow.
It's terrible. I still want to see David Ayer's version of Suicide Squad, just out of curiosity at this point.
Did you like Bird of Prey?
I did. I thought it was actually kind of interesting. It was a different take on it. It wasn't what I was expecting, but in a good way.
Yeah, I didn't love that movie, but I thought it was better than, I haven't seen Suicide Squad because it just looks like a nightmare. But this is a comic book movie. It's based on the protagonist is a dark and twisted character,
mm-hmm.
but you take that premise and you create hijinks, right?
Yeah. And it works.
You create a lot of humor. You create a lot of antics. You create a lot of action. And you don't have to dwell on it.
Yeah.
You just make a freaking movie. And that works a lot better than trying to, unpack the psyche of the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hate the Joker as much as I probably wanted myself to hate it, but I would much rather go back and watch Bird of Prey again as opposed to watching the Joker again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've watched Joker once, and I wanted to go back and watch it, but I don't. I look at it and I'm like, I'm good. Like, I'm not dying to go check it out again, So I guess that says a lot, because if I really like a movie, I'm going to watch it again. I don't give a damn what it is, what it takes. I'll watch it again. That's just one of those that I have not done.
Maybe that kind of puts the point on what we're talking about here is you have nobody's looking for these deep dives, these deep origin stories, these deep retellings and reimaginings of these comic book characters. You just want the story.
Yeah.
You just want the action. And you want a little bit of drama. You want a little bit of interpersonal drama. That's what I think a lot of people were drawn to with like the X-Men back in the 90s with Chris Claremont. They were like very soap opera-esque, but they were also action-packed. And I think that's what some of the first X-Men movies were able to draw from, and then and capitalize on in those movies. But again, Bird of Prey, fun movie, right? Takes a dark and twisted character, makes a fun movie out of it. Joker, not a fun movie.
It's not.
It takes a dark and twisted character and tries to dive into the psyche and the origins of that dark and twisted character. But who cares, right?
Yeah. Because that was always the most fascinating thing. Who is this guy? Don't know.
Yeah, and that's why The Dark
you.
Knight works so freaking well. You don't know why the Joker is the way he is. He's just fucking twisted.
Yeah.
And he's going to fuck up Gotham City and Batman until he's stopped. That's the freaking plot. That's the story. And that's why we watch, because it's freaking exciting. And going back to Tim Burton, the Joker, he's a small-time thug, petty thug. He's having an affair with his boss's wife, and he gets dropped in a vat of acid. Turns into the Joker. There you go. That's all you need to know. Right?
Yeah. I mean, if it works, it works. I didn't question it back then. I do now because I've heard those stories. That's not what I wanted. I didn't want Joker to be the one who killed his parents, but it works for that movie.
that's they're taking. You only have 2 hours, right? Hopefully 2 hours to tell the story in a movie, not 4 hours. Preferably. I mean, sometimes movies can go longer.
Just depends.
I'm joking, but really, you don't have a limited amount of time to tell a concise and complete story. Hopefully, with a movie. And so they have to elide or kind of combine different elements in order to make the drama the strongest they can. So yeah, they fudged a little bit, making the Joker the killer of his parents when that's not canon, but they didn't care. They wanted to make a movie. I think that's the important part. That was going to lead me into something else, but I can tell you're upset because you were very much you want the canon to be the canon.
I don't care. It's fine.
Okay, good.
No, it's fine. I got nothing else on this topic. I think I've said my piece. I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, on that note, everyone, thank you for listening. If you have a topic you want us to talk about, if you have an opinion, if you have a dark, gritty reboot you like or dislike, you can hit us up on our Twitter handles with the hashtag CinemaSalsa until we get a proper Twitter that we may or we may not. Who cares? You can tell your friends to find us on all your favorite platforms, maybe. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Podcasts. We're on Anchor. We're on Radio Public, whatever that is, and even YouTube.com/Pencil Paper Productions. How about that? We're already there. 5 in and we're already there.
I was excited.
Yeah. So
to see it pop up on my YouTube feed, I was like, what?
What? There it is.
And then went to Spotify and it was there. I was like, what?
It's on the big ones, I'll say that. It's not everywhere yet, but it's getting there. I mean, Apple and Spotify, boom. We're making money now. We're not, but just
whoa, you're making money? You're not sending me any money.
No, we're not. We're hoping to. Whenever those ad dollars kick in, that whole 2 cents, I'll split it with you. You get a penny, I get one. But anyway, be sure to join us again next week if you enjoy our film talk. But until then, keep supporting your local theater. And we'll see you next time.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.